Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down, and back for another Spooktober edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. That's right, we are churning through all of our October or Spooktober movies that we have this month, and we just talked about the clumsiest handoff from like one week of movies to another after talking about Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. If you want to know my thoughts on that very oddly placed movie inside of the Halloween franchise, you can check them out right there. But now we turn our attention to what I like to call my vampire week, man. Go on a little run of vampire movies. I'm a huge vampire nerd. Anytime there's a movie or a TV show or just anything that has to do with vampires, I'm always in. I find the characters to be so interesting, because they come from this place of evil, but if you're turned unwillingly, or that's your only choice, you can have these really interesting conversations in and around vampires. Like there's so I'm like I said, I'm just always fascinated with the genre. And if you're gonna kick off a week of vampire movies, I think there's only one movie that you could possibly start with, and that is Mr. Francis Ford Coppola's definitive view of one of the greatest vampire characters of all time, Mr. Dracula. If you want to dive into the world of Dracula and you hadn't before, this is the movie you start with. What am I talking about? Why don't you pull up a chair, take a seat, we're getting ready to dive in, spoiler-free-ish, into Bram Stoker's Dracula. And yes, I think this is the definitive Dracula tale that currently exists in the world. Of all the movies that have been done in and around Dracula that I have watched, this is the one I always come back to and go, yeah, I want to scratch that Dracula itch. Bram Stoker's Dracula is where I'm going. And I have not read Bram Stoker's Dracula entirely. You guys know me. I'm not a big reader unless there's lots of pictures involved, although I am getting into audiobooks. So maybe one day we'll throw this one on. But from what I understand, Francis Ford Coppola is not like 100% accurate to the book. There are definitely some changes that him and writer James V. Hart make to the storyline. In particular, based off what the internet has told me, the biggest difference being the love story that is created between Dracula and Winona Ryder's character, Mina. That is not present in the book the way it is here. However, it is a piece of the story that I've always found to be super interesting, and the part that I think kind of elevates the material in a way, because one of the things I've always found interesting with vampires in general is that, like, there's a human in there somewhere, and the idea of Dracula seeing his love that he had prior to dying kind of takes shape in Mina, and that like attraction to her just almost being eternal, right, so to speak. I thought it was a really interesting, aspect, and it adds a lot of depth to both Dracula, to Mina's character, and to the world that we're in. So it's one of those where, while this isn't a verbatim, like, spot-on adaptation of Stoker's Dracula, it's a very, very, very good one, based on everything that I've read. Coppola, outside of that element and a few other small things here and there, really does do a wonderful job in adapting the book, as well as utilizing the idea of different points of focus and, a lot of these voiceovers that we get in the movie. Throughout the movie, you get voiceovers from almost all of the different characters, from Winona Ryder's Mina to Anthony Hopkins' Van Helsing to Keanu Reeves' Jonathan Harker. And all of that represents perspective shifts. And from what I understand, a lot of those voiceovers are literally verbatim the words that are written in the book in those passages. And that's really cool. I love when you see a writer and a director get together to adapt a piece of material and show it the respect that it deserves, but also show that, like, they're fans of the material. And that's what I see in this adaptation of Dracula. And Coppola, man, I mean, he's just he's a genius behind the camera. And I mean, like, I think this was nominated for 6 Oscars and took away 4, all in the minor categories. Where you're talking about costume design, production design, And very, very, very well deserved, because when you look at this film from its costume design and its visual effects makeup, I mean, Gary Oldman, who you can't really see his face here, but they put that man. I would love, if I ever had a chance to talk to Gary Oldman, I would be like, describe to me what it was like to work on Dracula and just be put into all the different shades of makeup that he's in. You know, Dracula has this ability to shapeshift, right? He can be a mist or a fog. He can be, you know, a vampire. He can be a bat. He can be a wolf. And you get to see a lot of these transformations and him in these different forms, and all of them include some sort of prosthetic that's put on him. And I mean, it works so well. The visuals behind everything around Dracula, from his castle to the way that he operates inside of London. And sorry, if you're not familiar with Bram Stoker's Dracula, essentially you see the beginning of Dracula, right, and how, you know, things kind of start for him. But the concept of the movie is that he buys up all this property in England. They send out, you know, someone from the firm named Jonathan Harker to kind of square away all of the deals, and then he asks Harker to stay for a month to teach him the customs of London before moving over there. Now, naturally, they're shipping all of these containers of dirt and soil from his estate so that he can sleep in all these different places in London, but the whole idea is for him to leave a very uncivilized, you know, Eastern European country and come to a very, very civilized city in London and see how, you know, Dracula operates there. And like I said, everything around the Dracula character visually is just stunning. I mean, from what they put Oldman into, like I said, his castle and just the different set pieces. I mean, everything is, the scope is huge, and it just all looks so tangible, right? Like, you just feel like this is a world that exists. And then when you just take what Coppola does from behind the camera, man, I mean, one of the coolest things for me with this movie anytime I watch it is how Coppola uses shadow. And, like, specifically Dracula's shadow. Like, there are times where, like, you see Dracula, he's in a room, you see Oldman standing there, the shadow's on the wall, he'll move and the shadow will stay, or it'll start to do things that, you know, he's not doing. And the way that, like, he'll come in to strangle someone as a shadow, or, you know, creep up on somebody even though he's physically present elsewhere. Visually, I think is one of the best things Coppola does in the movie. But, I mean, all over this thing is just gorgeousness. From, you know, Keanu, you know, Reeves, who plays Jonathan Harker, like the sequence where he is, you know, fed on by the vampires that are Dracula's wives. Like, that sequence, man, like the way they come up and out of the sheets in the bed, and like the way they appear or they move on the walls, like that whole sequence is just stunning to look at. And everything that Coppola does behind the camera, I mean, it really just works. And this is one of those movies that visually just kind of pulls you through it as much as the story does. And like I said, James V. Hart was the man on the screenplay here. And like I said, I think he does a wonderful job. Like, this is an adaptation that's gripping. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. And so much of that is derived from that romance between Dracula and Mina. And while, you know, they take liberties and change things, I think the things that they change, based on what I've read, are things that really do help the movie out a lot. And if that stuff somehow isn't working for you, well then shoot. Coppola brought together, like, just an unbelievable cast of characters, led by the phenomenal Gary Oldman as Dracula. What he does as Dracula and Vlad the Impaler, like, I know the book doesn't definitively say that Vlad the Impaler and Dracula were the same character. Coppola does here in the movie. But it's one of those things where, like, getting to watch Oldman play that version of Dracula before he becomes a vampire, like, he brings it, you know what I mean, man? Like, the suit of armor that he's got on is so badass. But that whole opening sequence is just phenomenal. And where Oldman takes it from where he looks like old Dracula to when he's revived and young, and just the chemistry that he has with Winona Ryder the whole film. Like, he just, I mean, when does Gary Oldman ever not deliver? You know what I mean? But he is absolutely phenomenal. He's scary and he is seductive. And that's exactly what you need in a Dracula. And to this point in time, Gary Oldman is still my favorite Dracula to date. But he's not the only one here. Like I said, this is a huge cast. And in that number 2 spot, you got to talk about Winona Ryder as Mina, who is the fiancée and eventual wife to Jonathan Harker. And while Harker is kind of stuck in Transylvania and Dracula is able to move about London by himself, that's his in to Mina. And Mina looks very much like his wife from his previous life. So that's, why he's so attracted to her. And it's one of these things where, like, I feel like there are probably lots of people who don't understand, like, how big time Winona Ryder was. But, like, Winona Ryder was a big time actor. And specifically at this point in time in her career, like, that's a big get. And she delivers as she did it in that time. And as she always does. I mean, even though she hasn't done anything major outside of Stranger Things recently, like, I've always been fascinated with what Ryder can do on screen because she is a very, very talented actor. And I love what she does with Mina here, Like, you can see that love that she has for Keanu's, Harker. And, I mean, like, just how that relationship works and how into it she is, so that as she's lured away by Dracula, and even when, Harker re-enters the picture and Dracula's still around, like, she cannot separate herself from him because of what he's done to her in this little mini relationship that they have going on when Harker's absent. And I love the way that she plays kind of like both sides of that fence. And throughout the movie, like I said, it's one of the things that keeps you extremely gripped to what's going on and on the edge of your seat, because you're not entirely sure which way she's gonna go by the time you get to the end of the film. Like, will she lean into the human race, or will she lean into, becoming, one of Dracula's wives? And it's one of the things that I think Ryder does really, really well, is keeping you guessing. Even to a point where, like, there's a moment where Dracula's, toward the end, and there's a move, and, Harker is like, let her handle it. And you're like, let her handle it. Like, she gonna go in there, revive that stuff. Y'all gonna be dead in a second. And I love the way that Ryder handles that stuff. And then, of course, you have Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker. And I'm a massive Keanu fan. You guys know that. I think he's fantastic here, but he has moments in this one where it's like, it's still pretty early on in Keanu's career, and there are moments where he gets, like, excited or riled up, and you get, like, a British Ted from Bill. Like, you get the Ted that he has from Bill and Ted, but with this, like, bit of a British accent. It made me chuckle a couple of times, and, obviously unintentional, but, like, at that point in his career, he was so attached to that character that, like, you could definitely see some of it bleed over occasionally as Harker. But, I think Keanu's just fine here. He's not used a ton, but I think he does a wonderful job as Harker. His chemistry with Winona Ryder is fantastic, and I mean, they are longtime friends. So, like, this was like the early days, maybe one of the first things they worked on together. And you can just see how, like, that friendship and that relationship that the two of them have just sparks in general. And that, like, Ryder's connection to Oldman is just as important as it is to Keanu. And that chemistry between all three of them is really good. I mean, Oldman and Keanu, when they're on screen together too, specifically when, Keanu first shows up at the castle. Like, you get some really good stuff from both of them, and I love their chemistry. Then you got Anthony Hopkins, who we see as a priest at the beginning of the movie, but ultimately he plays Dr. Abraham Van Helsing. And, I mean, you're talking about one of the greatest of all time. And in this one, Hopkins is just chewing scenery. He's having a good time. And you sit here and you go, it's crazy, man. Because, like, Anthony Hopkins, back, like, in 92, like, he kind of looks old in this movie. And, like, it's 20 plus years since then, guy's still acting and knocking it out of the ballpark anytime he's on screen. But always a phenomenal addition, and of all the Van Helsing performances I've seen, it's one of my personal favorites. Then you have a super young Richard E. Grant. This is one of those moments where it's like, as a kid, and even like up until college, I was not this kind of a movie nut, where like I'm so familiar with so many different actors and all the different things that they've done, where like you throw on Dracula, and like, having watched and enjoyed Richard E. Grant and all the things that I've watched and enjoyed him, in as an adult, kind of forgot that like it's him in this movie, and he is so young, but he plays this doctor that's kind of part of the Harker and Van Helsing trio, as well as a couple other characters that are tied to a friend of Mina's who Dracula ends up turning into a vampire. But seeing Richard E. Grant so young, and he kind of plays this little bit of a loopy, kind of crazy doctor, like just wonderful stuff. Like I got so excited because I was like, I forgot that was Richard E. Grant because he's so young. But he's fantastic. You have Carrie Elwes here, who, I mean, if you're a fan of Princess and the Bride, I mean, you should be a big fan of Carrie Elwes. He plays Lord Arthur Holmwood, who, is supposed to marry a friend of Mina's who gets turned into a vampire. So he gets pulled in along with his friend Billy Campbell, who plays Quincy P. Morris. And, those two plus the Doctor, Van Helsing, and Harker kind of create our team to go up against Dracula at the end. And while Elwes and Campbell aren't used a lot, they do good stuff. And certainly in that time period, like in 92, just to see Carrie Elwes pop up in the movie, like, you'd get excited about that. And I mean, there are plenty of other characters throughout here. I mean, Monica Bellucci pops up. She's one of Dracula's brides. You just have a bunch of people. Tom Waits, who plays Reinfeld, that was like Dracula's first like human cohort that he has working for him that he abandons and then takes in Jonathan Harker. But like the cast list is just stellar. It's stellar, and everybody brings good performances, and you just create this world in and around Dracula that you want to live in. Like it's a terrifying world. I don't want to run into Dracula, specifically stuff that's going down at his castle. But like it is a world that just feels so tangible and real, and I think what Coppola does behind the camera specifically, like I said, like he does so many cool things. You just create a movie that's just rock solid, and this will always be the bar for Dracula. You got to be able to top this if you want to be the best Dracula in the game. So there you go, man. Those are all the Seaman's non-spoiler-ish thoughts on the Bram Stoker's Dracula, which of course is the Francis Ford Coppola version of the story. One of my personal favorite Draculas of all time, so we got to give this bad boy a score. Let's get the Seamaniacs up. Like I said, one of my personal favorites. I think this is the bar for Dracula. What Coppola does behind the camera here, I mean, shouldn't shock anybody. It's stellar, but specifically the things that he does when it comes to the vampire stuff, and specifically Dracula and his shadow. Like the shadow play in this movie is phenomenal. The world that he comes from in Transylvania, like it's just so, it just feels so real, and the performances that you get from the cast just enhance everything that Coppola's doing. I mean, what he's doing behind the camera, it's just always either to play off of or elevate what his cast members are doing, and a huge star-studded cast really does knock this one out of the water for what is easily the best adaptation from Bram Stoker's Dracula. And like I said, I think this is the definitive movie you go to. Like, if you're talking Dracula, this is where you start. So for the Seaman, 4 out of 5 Seamaniacs. I've always been a huge Dracula fan, big vampire fan, and this is one of those starting bases, man. Like, this was my early way into a lot of the Dracula stuff, and I think Coppola just knocks this one out of the ballpark. So there you go, man. That's everything I gotta say. No one know what you're thinking. What are your thoughts on Dracula? Where do you fall in the world of vampires? How many Dracula movies have you watched? Where does this one fall in your rankings of Dracula movies? Is it the top? Is it the best? Is Gary Oldman the guy to beat for you? If you haven't seen this movie, what's wrong with you? Like, you must not be a vampire. No, I'm kidding. Plenty of people probably haven't seen this movie, so if you haven't seen it and you stumbled across me talking about it, has this intrigued you to want to see it? Is vampires something that you want to dip your toe into? I think there's a lot of cool things you can do with vampires, both super, super scary and super fun. So this is a pretty good combination of both, although it's definitely more on the scary side. So if you haven't seen it, let me know if you're interested, and anything you got, man, on Dracula, good, bad, indifferent, goes down below in the comments section. Look forward to talking to you guys down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you're new, you want to come hang out with the Seaman, rest of our vampire week of our Spooktober run, we got some good movies coming up. Interview with the Vampire, we got Blade in there, we brought in Fright Night, we got the latest from from Netflix Night Teeth this week. As you can see, we've got plenty of vampire things to talk about coming up. So if you want to be here for all that, you just want to be here when I'm talking movies, TV, trailer reactions. We got Dune coming out on Thursday. You want to be here to see my thoughts on that, one of the most highly anticipated movies of the year. You haven't yet, you want to show a little love and support the old Seaman? Well, come join C-Maniac Nation, because that's where you can do all of those things. And super easy. Just jump over there, hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts. And until next time, for the C-Man's Cinema, sit down. I've been the C-Man. I'm signing off. Peace. Oh, hey, what's going on? You must be sticking around because you're looking for more content featuring this guy. Well, guess what? You're in the right place. You can check out more videos right here and right here. And if you have and you want to come join that C-Maniac Nation, you can hit that subscribe right over there.